welcome back to the Game Collection, and happy Halloween! I am SuperDerek, and this is Shadow Hearts. Following the release of Koudelka, the development team Sacnoth was going through some hard times. Koudelka didn't sell particularly well and received some pretty mixed reviews from critics. In the aftermath, founder Kiroki Kikuta stepped down from the head of Sacnoth as the parent company SNK was in the process of going under. Aruze Entertainment stepped in, picked up the pieces of the shattering company, stitched it back together, and breathed in new life. In this fashion, Sacnoth rose from the dead in order to set out to do what it could not during life, to create the pure, turn-based horror RPG that they had always wanted. The team went to work on a direct follow-up to Koudelka that would be released as Shadow Hearts in 2001 for the PlayStation 2. The story of Shadow Hearts follows Yuri, a rather rude and vulgar anti-hero type who happens to have a very special ability. He's a harmonixer, a shapeshifter that can fuse into different monsters. As the story begins, Yuri is being driven by a painful voice he hears in his head. It compels him to rescue an English girl, Alice Elliot, who is being pursued by an evil magician. An unlikely duo, Yuri and Alice set off to uncover the secrets behind this evil magician, dodging demented demons along the way. Shadow Hearts plays out sort of like a mystery story, which sets our heroes off globetrotting around the world, chasing down bad guys, clues, and information. The touch-and-go style of story progression felt kind of quick-paced, but also kind of scrambled. I felt like a chicken with my head cut off, running around, going here, doing that, something happened over there, now it's time to go somewhere else. It all felt really reactive, which is exactly how the gang in the game behaved. This, in my opinion, didn't feel like a well-told overall story. It was kind of messy. In the moment, everything made sense. In hindsight, though, it felt like a scramble of confusion, making it hard to recap to myself exactly where I've been, where I'm going, and how I got here. Regardless of the frantic pacing, the game had an edge to it that you don't often see in RPGs of the era, a coolness factor that's hard to quantify. At the beginning of the game, Yuri is a jerk that honestly couldn't exist in a video game in today's current political climate, but over the course of the game, his demeanor changes subtly in a way that shows character growth without changing his personality altogether. I like that this change was slow and subtle. Too many games try to show overt character transformations rather than evolutions, leave it to a Lovecraftian horror of all things to treat character growth with the most nuance. The game also features symbolism that astute players could delve into if they wanted to, but doesn't beat you over the head with it. The game takes a chance on narrative subtlety, and as a result, I think it makes the lore feel deeper. Shadow Hearts takes place in an alternate reality during the 1900s and spans across Shanghai, China, and Europe. Because of the alternate reality settings, some liberties were taken with the depictions of various real-world locations. For instance, some districts of Shanghai were far more developed and urban in this game than in our version of history. However, these anachronisms are only mildly distracting from time to time. For the most part, the locales were depicted believably enough. That said, most cities and towns felt a little small, spanning only a handful of screens to navigate. Because the game spans continents, it would probably be unreasonable to expect an overworld map, so instead the game uses a world map with fast travel points for intercity travel. Dungeon designs were more interesting and typically spanned several more screens than entire cities, and appear to be the real focus the designers worked on. The dungeons were pretty creepy and diverse. Long, winding tunnels, Eastern temple interiors, European mansions, and blood-covered rural villages were among the locales explored. None of these were particularly amazing, but none of them were bad either. Combat within Shadow Hearts plays out like most standard turn-based RPGs, but features a twist, the Ring of Judgment. This Ring of Judgment requires the player to enter precisely timed button presses as indicated on a wheel. During a typical attack action, the character has a chance to hit up to 3 times. As the cursor rotates around the ring, pressing the button with good timing will result in hitting the enemy. Hitting perfect timing on the edge of that area will result in increased damage output, but missing the field will result in inaction by the character. This plays out very similarly to Legend of Dragoon's battle system, which is no mere coincidence, as many of the developers behind Legend of Dragoon also worked on the Shadow Hearts series. In an additional layer of complexity, Yuri can use his harmonixer transformations within battle to gain additional demon stats and skills, such as attacks and healing magic. Other characters also have unique abilities and magic of their own, though none of these seem to be quite as powerful as Yuri. This battle system does require player attention during each battle, as mindlessly mashing the X will result in no damage being dealt whatsoever. It should also be noted, however, that this mechanic will require a low latency display for optimal fun. Due to my streaming setup, I did encounter lots of display latency that I had to adapt to, but in the end, it was something that I could adapt to. Another welcome addition to the battle system is the inclusion of SP, or sanity points. Because the players are fighting hellish and grotesque monsters constantly, each character has SP that reduces each round of battle. Some characters have more SP than others, and when their SP reaches 0, they go berserk and cannot be controlled, performing random actions. Because of this, you will need to keep a nice stock of SP refilling items handy at all times, and keep an eye on the ever-depleting pools. This sort of resource management works really well within an RPG system and fits especially well within the horror RPG genre. One thing that did tend to bug me about the battles occurred mostly during boss fights. Status effects seem to last indefinitely, and most enemies don't tend to cause many status ailments. However, some bosses will spam those status effects, including petrification, silence, confusion, or instant death, and some of these are applied to AoE skills. The result is that you will often need to fight a boss twice. The first time to find out what their status effect is, and the second time after you've equipped the resistant charms. These often felt like cheap deaths that couldn't have been avoided without using a guide. Luckily, most boss fights happen right after a save point. However, some occur immediately after a preceding boss fight and lengthy, unskippable cutscenes. Outside of battle, the gameplay mostly consists of navigating maze-like dungeons, solving simple puzzles, and locating hidden treasure chests. These honestly feel like more of an afterthought than anything else, and were often simple distractions for only moments at a time. There were more annoying minigames scattered throughout the storyline's events though. In order to kick down doors or grab items, you would need to successfully complete certain patterns of the Judgment Ring. Some of these were no big deal, but others required so much persistence that I could be stuck on them for several minutes at a time, or longer depending on my luck. One of the better implementations of this sort of minigame was during the buying and selling of goods. The player could opt in to playing a game in order to earn 10, 20, or 30% off their total order cost, while failing resulted in paying full retail. The graphics within Shadow Hearts aren't really all that much to write home about. The game was a very early PS2 title, and as such, it probably began development for PlayStation 1 but changed gears at the last minute. Some enemy designs, for instance, appear to have been directly ported over from Koudelka, with very few changes being made for the PlayStation 2. The environments are pre-rendered backgrounds with the polygonal characters mapped over top, similar to Koudelka. These were serviceable, though after reviewing some of my footage from my Koudelka playthrough, I feel like the backgrounds pale in comparison to Koudelka, lacking dynamic range. Many of the backgrounds looked like someone cranked the gamma all the way up in order to keep all the important details visible, rather than the Koudelka approach of designing each room to be dark and creepy, yet maintain their detail. Despite the lower fidelity presentation, the art direction was still on point. Enemy designs are positively putrid and downright disgusting, exactly the perfect kind of grotesque and gruesome ghouls to put you in the mood for Halloween. For a horror RPG, this game isn't exactly scary, but it manages to be creepy and disturbing, which is just about perfect for me, because I honestly don't like being too scared. It's not enjoyable to me, but this works for me. Character animation throughout the game also takes a substantial hit in comparison to Koudelka. While the characters are higher resolution and higher polygon count, the motion capture for Koudelka is far more emotive. That said, the animation within Koudelka was far ahead of its time, and really says more about how great Koudelka was rather than anything truly negative about Shadow Hearts. In the audio department, I was honestly a bit disappointed by the lack of high-caliber end-to-end voice acting that we were treated to in Koudelka, and I was also disappointed by the lackluster voice acting featured in the cutscenes. I don't typically dog on voice acting because it's not an easy skill, but I can honestly say that none of the voices fit any of the characters. None of the deliveries were on point, and this is probably the least English-sounding supposed Englishman that I have ever heard.
Watch my ultimate dream. Now I shall achieve it. Behold!
The music was hit and miss for me, mostly hits, but some tracks featured a wailing, warbling female voice that really wasn't all that bad in and of itself, but by the end of a 30-hour run, it became pretty grating. On the other hand, very few songs stuck with me after I would turn the console off at night, for better or worse. Shadow Hearts, much like its older sibling, is a short romp that can be beaten in about 30 hours or so. This, paired with a creepy aesthetic and demonic imagery, made it a perfect Halloween season title. The battle system alone makes it a must-play for fans of Legend of Dragoon. However, the overall presentation was a bit lackluster, and the storyline took a while to grab me, though grab me it eventually did. Shadow Hearts is a lot like the protagonist within it. rude, rough around the edges, creepy at times, but it's also cool and endearing, and it's got a good heart. And for these reasons, the game has definitely earned itself a spot in the game collection.
If this review has sparked your interest, I would recommend you also check out my review of Koudelka and Legend of Dragoon. Koudelka features a similar atmosphere, while Legend of Dragoon features a similar battle system.